Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Happy Valentine's Day for those celebrating. An apropos topic. Let's do it. Married Redditors. What's the creepiest thing your spouse has ever done? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Back when my husband and I were dating, we lived in an apartment that had a hospice patient in the apartment below us who eventually passed. One night, my husband fell asleep with the TV on. I woke to turn it off and went back to bed. He suddenly sat up in bed and I stared at the doorway to our room for a few minutes, eyes wide open. I'm freaking out at this point, thinking he's effing with me. I'm trying to get him to respond, saying it's not funny anymore. He just suddenly says, "You're not welcome here," stares for about 5 more minutes, and then just lays down and goes back to sleep with his back to me. Needless to say, no matter what I did, that man would not wake up. The next morning he had no memory of it, and it never happened again. Still makes my gut churn when I think back on it. My ex-husband had returned from a deployment, and it was a pretty rough one. He was there for Fallujah, and yeah, it was just tough on him. He was having a hard time sleeping and was prescribed a couple of doses of Ambien to get back on the US clock. I was sleeping, but woke up when I heard a metal clink and saw that he was sitting on the edge of the bed. I asked if he was okay, and he turned his head to me slowly and said something incoherent, then put his finger to the tip of his lip in a shush and slowly turned his head back to face the door. I got up, and he was sitting there on the edge of the bed, buck-ass naked except for his socks and boots laced up, holding his locked and loaded AK-47. That was the sound I heard. He'd somehow gotten up, found his Unsafe keys, gone to the basement, pulled out his AK, pulled his ammo out of a separate ammo box, loaded a magazine, put on his boots, and come back to bed. I was instantly as awake as a human can be. Like, this shit could go real effing bad, real effing fast. I told him it was my turn for guard duty, and to get some sleep. He just kinda grunted, and fell sideways into bed, rolled over, and started snoring. I earned my ninja badge that night getting the gun away from him. I didn't sleep a wink because I couldn't find the gun safe keys, so I just kept vigil in bed and read a book, soothing him when he started stirring. He remembered none of it. I locked his gun safe keys away from him for a very long time after that night, and he didn't take Ambien again. That shit really F's with people. My husband and I met online and married after only 6 months. It was a whirlwind, but it was the right choice. 10 years in, and it's still great. However, one night a month or two after we married, I woke up in the night to him death gripping my skull. Not sure if he was sleeping. I panicked, thinking I'd married an abuser. I talked to him. Nothing. I finally eased his hands off me and breathed a sigh of relief. Another few seconds went by, and his hand whipped out and grabbed my skull again. Then I really panicked. Eventually he let go, and I lay there in the dark trying not to think of what I'd gotten myself into, and being grateful he grabbed me where he did and not an inch or two further down, where his fingers would have gone into my eyes. Come morning, he had absolutely no memory of this whatsoever. He has never done it again. He's never been even remotely harsh with me, ever. So it's something we laugh about now. What I wouldn't give to know what he was dreaming that night. My sweet, beautiful, loving wife is an Irish immigrant. She's only been here in the US for 6 years and still has moments of culture shock, mainly with how rude people can be in public. A woman approached us at the grocery store, and we were discussing dinner, and told her the classic, "You need to speak English." Yes, my wife can be difficult to understand, and it can sound like she's speaking some sort of dark orcish language, so my wife removed the bottle of drain cleaner from our cart and told this woman to go drink it, and suggested mixing it with Diet Coke to make it go down. Security was called. I was a mix of mortified and proud, and my wife made a comment about years of bloody war and terrorism, and she thought I'd just rolled over like some helpless bitch. P.S. Security did not remove anybody from the store, but the other woman was told in no uncertain terms that she was not allowed to harass other customers if she would like to be allowed to shop there in the future. My wife saw me typing this and said, "You tell them, I'll do it again." My pale-ass Russian wife sleeps like a vampire, arms crossed and all that. She also has a weird upbringing and believes in premonitions. Twice she hasn't let me go somewhere because she had a bad dream. Twice. I got into a wreck that same day. Then, one time, she told me she dreamed she would find a black cat outside and that she would be pregnant. A week effing later, I heard meowing coming from outside. I'm like, "Hey, go feed your stray." She would feed the apartment strays and talk to them. Real Disney princess shit. She comes back with the black kitten and was like, "I told you so." We had never seen this stray before, and then a week later she peed on a stick and it was positive. Normally, I don't put stock in these things, but she is 3 for 3. I'm the creepy one, sadly. I have a sleep disorder where I wake up in REM. It makes me functionally psychotic in various ways, as in I see and hear hallucinations, made up things, illusions, misinterpret real things, and have a strong sense of being watched or persecuted. Usually I think there's surveillance around or people trying to crawl through the windows, etc. No meds really seem to touch it. I just have to try not to wake up in the middle of the night suddenly. Like if there's a noise outside or a glowing light, something to combine with waking in REM and seeing something unusual. It tends to be every few weeks, unless there's a lot of noise outside to wake me up. Last night, in fact, I was arguing with the people climbing through the window that they weren't going to murder me. I'm 100% not kidding. I sleep in a different room, so he can be sure to get enough sleep for work. Right now, I sleep in a room that's got plants in the window, and they've often illuminated at night by the neighbor leaving her living room light on all night. It's backlights, the snake plants, and they create all sorts of illusions for me. Rats climbing the walls, baby birds screaming for food, hands reaching through, etc. I sleep with a mask over my eyes, but if I wake up and hear something that startles me, I rip it off and freak out, lol. Over the years, I've come up with a few pacts I have with myself to cope, one of which is to just take pictures of the terrible things I think are going to hurt me and then go back to sleep. Either they're real and they'll get me, or they're fake and it'll just be a picture of the same window as before. But I need my sleep. One week, we had neighbors moving in next door without a moving truck, so they'd just show up with their cars and unload late into the night. I have a bunch of pictures of the same window over and over, night after night. Not so much creepy as kinda scary. My wife was trying a new medication. I don't remember what, but apparently you're not supposed to mix it with alcohol. She had had a couple of glasses of wine with dinner. Later, when it was time for bed, I was already in bed, and she was in the bathroom doing her bedtime routine when she just kind of collapsed. Fortunately, the door was open, so I saw it happen. It was weird because it was like a controlled fall, so I thought she was just being silly or goofy. Then I said her name twice and she didn't respond, so I jumped out of bed and ran over to her on the floor. I had to shake her shoulder fairly hard and yell her name to get her to wake up, but when she finally did, she looked at me all annoyed and said, "What?" Like I'd just woken her up from a deep sleep for no reason. I got her into bed and she fell back asleep. The next morning she didn't remember any of it. Scared the shit out of me though. My married friends, when they were moving to their new home, their lease ended at their apartment before they could move in, so I let them crash at my house until they could finalize and move into their house. One night I came home late with her husband. We walked past the living room down the hall to our respective rooms, not noticing her standing there asleep in the darkened living room until a little bit later when I went to take a shower and looked down the dark hall, seeing a shadowy figure standing in the dark. I still live in this house, and every so often I freak out at the thought of someone hiding in a dark corner of my house, going unnoticed because of that incident. She's never before or after had sleepwalking episodes. Her husband, Mike, thinks it's because of the stress of moving to a new house and bills. My fiancé suffers night terrors if he takes sleep meds that contain melatonin. He's had to start using things like lavender and eucalyptus, but he had several of them before I was able to pinpoint what was causing them, because he used the sleeping meds every work night, but it only occasionally caused them. He never remembers what happens after either, which I guess is fairly common. Anyway, around 2 to 3 a.m. on a Tuesday night or Wednesday morning, he woke me up, initially talking aggressively, before quickly escalating into full-on screams of anger and terror. Normally, he will wake up if I gently rub his chest and softly comfort him, or if he's flailing, I'll bear hug him until he calms down. He wasn't waking up, no matter what I tried or said. His screaming is always mostly incoherent mutterings, even when yelling. It's not usually words, but sounds. Nope. This time he looks right at my face, eyes closed, and tells me that they've finally gotten into the house, and he's behind me. Sensible me would have realized immediately that my very protective dogs never made a noise, so clearly no one was in the house. But woken in the middle of the sleep, I screamed and flung myself around to look, inadvertently kidney punching my fiancé. Funny enough, that woke him up in almost as much terror as he was in a sleep. Not him, me. When we were first married, we lived in his parents' guest house the first year. He swears I did this creepy thing he still gives me shit for. We were watching TV in bed and I fell asleep. He continued to watch, got peckish, and grabbed a bag of chips from the kitchen and came back to bed. He said he was happily crunching away when I suddenly turned my face to him and said, "You sound like a fucking rat. If you don't stop, I'll fuck you up, you fucking rat motherfucker." And then I lay back down and slept. He said he didn't move for a long time, just watched me sleep. He said my eyes had been all black as if my pupils were dilated, and it wasn't my usual voice inflection, let alone the language I used. He was so scared he was afraid to move and wake me again. After a long while, he said he carefully got out of bed and tiptoed away from me without turning his back to me. Worse, he said he then realized my eyes weren't all the way closed, and he had the most unsettling feeling I was watching him. When he reached the hallway, he made a wild dash for the front door and bolted for his parents' house and spent the night there. I don't recall the incident at all. Look, as someone who can be sensitive to certain sounds when awake, I can't relate to the sleep part, but that inner voice can be pretty strong if someone is open-mouthed chewing or guffawing or just ugh. Bleh. So, maybe you were, you're not awake, but wow. Pretty funny though that it worked out, but strong language. He scared me and the dog into thinking there was a cryptid in our house. First, my husband has a terrible diet and had to use the toilet at 3 a.m. So he leaves and uses the downstairs bathroom so he doesn't wake me up. Then he somehow throws his head out, pushing so hard he sees stars. Then he cleans himself up and hobbles out of the bathroom and climbs up the stairs on all fours while grunting like a BDSM freak, which causes the dog to freak out and wake me up. I go to check what's going on and see a dark shape grunting and crawling up the stairs like the girl from The Ring. So I run back to the bedroom and lock the door. Cut to a few minutes later, as I'm hiding under the covers as the doorknob is violently shaken repeatedly before I hear, "Honey, I think I broke my back." And it's just my dumbass husband who slithers into the room in agony, doesn't get back in bed, and just lays down on the rug and goes to sleep right there. When I was married at 19 to a 32-year-old man, we lived in a trailer. He worked morning to night at the local pizza place Monday to Saturday. I was desperately unemployed, seriously bored, and still pretty immature. So I spent most days watching TV and having old trailer park friends stop in. One morning, about a couple of hours after my husband left for work, one of my male friends I grew up with in the trailer park stopped in. He sat on the couch while I lay down on the floor watching TV. We had some laughs, and it was generally good spirits for a morning. At one point in the conversation, I looked back to say something to him, and I saw my husband silently crawling on the floor towards me with a mischievous look and a grin on his face. My friend and I both just froze. It was truly creepy. My husband kind of pretended to pounce on me as a joke, then sat on the couch and joined us like he's our friend, just playing around. I have a really bad psychology tic in which I smile and or laugh when I'm not feeling that way at all. So that's what I did while saying I thought he was at work and asking what he's doing here. It was that shocking. I'm asking the man what he's doing in his own home. He said he was hiding in the bedroom to scare me. Of course, he was hoping to catch me cheating, but that doesn't even matter to me. I totally understand why he would believe I was unfaithful. It's seeing my fully grown husband crawling on the floor toward me like a panther in the brush. My friend told me later he was completely creeped out by it. He said he didn't know what my husband was doing, but it gave him the same feeling as if a masked gunman had just invaded my home while we were hanging out. My husband liked knives. It wasn't until after I'd processed the incident for a while that I eventually came to believe he was likely at least thinking about how he would attack me and a male friend by surprise. Can't say it's as creepy as a lot of the stuff here, but my husband really loves boobs, specifically mine, to a point where he has attempted to sleep suckle multiple times, so far unsuccessfully. I will say the closest he's ever gotten was one night when he just started headbutting me in the chest, fully asleep, while making smacking or chewing noises and complaining that they weren't as soft. At this point, his skull was basically torpedoing my ribs, so no surprise there. Could not wake him. He got quite grabby. Didn't remember a damn thing the next day. But it's never happened again, lol. He still denies the sleep suckling thing though, SMH. My ex-husband had a few drinks one night, and I don't remember why. I think he needed a pain medication, but all that we had was the PM kind. But he took a Tylenol PM. He's someone who never takes anything. Fast forward, he's been dead asleep for hours, and suddenly he gets up and walks out of the room. I'm asking him what he's doing and if he's okay, but he's not answering me. Confused, I wait a few minutes, thinking he's coming back. He doesn't. And I go to the living room, and he's lying on the couch asleep. Right then, I started to smell something off. So I went to the kitchen and found the microwave on and smoke coming out. I opened it and found a plastic Tupperware with an instant macaroni and cheese cup. Opened, but with the cheese packet still inside, with no water in the cup, and the Tupperware has started melting, and the macaroni cup is on fire. He had no memory of it the next day, and he never took another PM anything. My husband usually falls asleep way before me, as I'm having trouble with falling asleep and sleeping through the night, thanks to depression. One night, he suddenly looked at me, exclaimed, "Schwarzenegger!" turned, and fell asleep again. The morning after, I asked him what the hell he was trying to tell me with that information. After laughing for about 10 minutes, he said he tried to place the German voice of an actor in a film we'd seen the night before. Turns out the same voice actor dubbed Arnold Schwarzenegger too. Yeah, thanks. I could have lived without that information at 3 a.m. The second one is still cracking me up to this day. Years ago, he ripped a huge fart, looked at me, giggled like a child, and then used his blanket to wave the pungent air to me. While I was busy trying not to die, he just turned around and snored again. When I told him in the morning, he was laughing so hard, he cried. So picture this. It's a dark and stormy night. No, seriously, it was. And I'm home alone because my wife Rachel was working late. Our house is one of those old Victorian types with creaky floors and spooky vibes, especially when the wind howls and the rain lashes against the windows. You get the picture. I'm sitting in the living room, binge watching a true crime documentary, which in hindsight was a terrible idea. The documentary was about this serial killer who broke into people's houses. Just as the detective in the show goes, the intruder was never caught. I hear a noise from the kitchen. My heart nearly leapt out of my chest. I paused the show, straining to hear nothing. I brush it off as the wind and hit play. Then a loud crash. I'm not talking about a small thud. It was like someone dropped a whole cabinet of pots and pans. I jump up, grab the nearest weapon-like object, which, hilariously, was a baguette, and tiptoe toward the kitchen. As I creep closer to the sound, it gets louder, rustling and shuffling, and then humming. My mind is racing. Is this it? Am I going to be the subject of the next true crime episode? I burst into the kitchen, baguette raised, and flick on the lights. There, standing in the middle of the room, is my wife, Rachel, completely oblivious to my terror. She's wearing her headphones, belting out Whitney Houston's I Will Always Love You at the top of her lungs, while organizing the Tupperware cabinet. Now, here's where it gets really creepy, or hilarious depending on your perspective. She didn't see or hear me come in, and she's really into the song. So in my panic-fueled brain, I decide the best course of action is to sing along. Yes, with that baguette as my microphone. I start belting out the chorus, matching her volume. Rachel, thinking she's still alone, almost jumps out of her skin when she realizes she got an unexpected duet partner. She whips around, yanks off her headphones, and we have this brief, heart-stopping moment of eye contact. Then she bursts out laughing. Turns out, she'd come home early, saw I was engrossed in my show, and decided to let me be while she tackled the chaos that was our Tupperware situation. She'd had no idea she was about to give me a mini heart attack. To this day, every time I hear Whitney Houston, I have flashbacks to that night, my weapon of choice, and the impromptu karaoke session. Rachel still teases me about how I tried to fight off a potential intruder with a loaf of bread. And me? Well, I make sure to always check if she's home before starting any true crime marathons. Now we both sleep talk, and he occasionally sleepwalks, but my sleepy self doesn't give up and usually lets him do his thing as he wanders back to bed. I can usually tell when he's sleepwalking or talking because he jolts awake and is typically very animated and in a hurry, except once, when he gently started tapping me awake. Babe, hey, wake up. I was grumpy and shortly said, "What?" He sounded completely awake. He proceeded to point to the darkest corner of the room near the door and say quietly, Babe, look at that white woman." Then he just turns around and goes back to sleep. I was and saw nothing, but was thoroughly freaked out. He did it 2 additional times in the next year and has zero recollection of the event. My response started being, "Nope, not tonight. Go to sleep." Now our babies will do something weird or creepy, and he jokingly blames the white woman. Big no thank you. My ex-girlfriend used to call me late at night when I was working as a security guard. So she calls me one night, and her voice on the phone got distorted. And I pointed out to her, but she thinks I'm making it up. So then I say, if there's any extraterrestrial intelligence interfering with this phone call, show a sign, because my ex was scared of aliens. And after I said that, the floodlight illuminating the work site goes dark. My stomach fell to the floor, and my girlfriend hung up on me because she thought I was trolling her. I walk over to the floodlight, and I can't get it to turn back on. I debated leaving work early that night. The next day, the construction company looked over the floodlight and said there was nothing wrong with it. Settling in, she started having frequent night terrors, the worst of which was where she went from lying down to bolting straight up, standing up in the bed, clawing at the air in front of her, screaming about the roof falling in on us. So yeah, the night terrors were bad. She also experienced some pretty big sleepwalking episodes if she'd been drinking. She'd fall asleep, then wake up a half hour later or so, and meander around the house. The worst episode of that was when I woke up and noticed she wasn't there. I got up and looked out the bedroom door, and it being a shotgun, I could see through the front door of the house, where she stood naked in the open doorway. It was around 4 a.m. She had opened all the doors and windows, and when I walked up to her, she turned around with a huge, unnatural smile on her face and said, "Do you hear him? The Doodah Man is coming. We have to be ready." I pulled her inside with her kicking and fighting me, and got the door shut, and she started to run to the back of the house, but literally ran into a wall, where she finally woke up with no recollection of what happened or who the Doodah Man was. We hypothesized that maybe she meant Mr. Okra, a local who would drive his truck around selling produce and had a loudspeaker over which he'd say stuff like, "I got potatoes, I got lettuce, I got okra." Not current partner, but my ex. We were in our early 20s and the whole relationship was very carefree. We had a lot of fun together. He was, in general, just a happy-go-lucky guy, rarely ever angry or moody, and always treated me with respect and kindness, very rarely argued. One day I was at his house. We were on our way up the stairs. I went into the spare bedroom where my overnight bag was. I was chatting with him as I rummaged through my stuff. I caught sight of him in the mirror. I don't think he knew I could see him. He was staring at me with a look of pure, absolute hatred, disgust, anger, and disdain on his face. Literally, like he hated me. Like I was saying something truly heinous and awful to him. I was not. We were talking about a pub quiz we were going to the next day, and about who of our friends was going. Honestly, it freaked me out so much, I turned around so my back wasn't to him anymore, and by the time he had turned to face him, his face had changed, and he was looking at me like he usually did. I asked him if he was okay, and he was like, "Yeah, fine, babe, why?" It was weird, and even though he has always been an extremely gentle and chilled out guy, who had never acted even vaguely aggressive toward me, or anyone else, I felt weirdly on guard and alert around him for a couple of days afterwards. I never saw that look on his face before or since, even during the odd, rare arguments we did have, or when he was angry about other certain things. Even when I broke up with him a couple of years later, I never saw anything close to the pure loathing I saw on his face that day. Still weirds me out. ETA. Just remembered there actually was one time he acted uncharacteristically aggressive toward me, but in the context I brushed it off as just an unfortunate mistake on his part. He does martial arts and is very proficient. One time we were messing around and pretending to spar but not actually making contact. I then stopped and went to hug him. I thought it was pretty clear due to my body language that I just wanted a hug. He blocked my arm so aggressively, he essentially punched my forearm as I reached out. It hurt enough that it really shocked me. I was like, "Dude, what the was that? I was going to hug you." He was like, "Sorry," knee-jerk response. He really was not very apologetic, considering I made it clear I did not actually hurt, and he would have known how hard he hit me because he's strong. As I said at the time, I brushed it off as an instinct from martial arts, but now I look back, and he was very good at keeping actual combat responses in the dojo, and whenever we would spar for real, or he would teach me the odd techniques for fun. He never did that. He also was good at being restrained during actual combat in classes. So I don't know what that was, but it was the only time. My husband is a butcher and sometimes talks in his sleep about cuts of meat or orders. It doesn't sound creepy, but when he's yelling, "We'll cut the ribs here," in the middle of the night, it can be creepy. My son must have inherited it because he sleepwalks and talks to us. Sometimes we find him sleeping in a weird place and have to guide him back to bed, and he never remembers any of it. He will come into the kitchen late at night before I go to bed and just talk gibberish at me. And more than once, I've caught him just standing in shadowy corners doing nothing, just standing there. It's creepy when I'm up alone at night, being the night owl of the family. I also get started very early, so it's incredibly creepy to me. My son had sleep terrors. One night, he was maybe 4 or so. He was sitting on the top bunk and screaming, eyes wide open but not awake, and I was trying to calm him. It was July, and our century-old house didn't have air conditioning, so the windows were open, and all the neighbors could hear him. Anyway, he stops screaming and starts crying, full out sobbing. I asked him what was wrong and thought his sobs. He said, "Mommy, Christmas is over," and burst into fresh tears. "Oh, honey," I responded. "Did you want more Christmas?" Yeah, he wailed. "Okay, we can have Christmas in the morning." Oh, okay. And he lay back down and fell back to sleep. He doesn't remember it happening, but years later, after hearing the story, he said that running out of Christmas would make everyone cry. My husband has a lot of medical problems. At one point, his entire medical situation had conspired to create very elaborate sleepwalking plus hallucinations. Once he woke up drinking soap out of the soap dispenser, because in his dream it was a water fountain. Once he cooked an entire breakfast for his kids in his sleep. The problem there was that it was 3 a.m. and the kids were at their mom's house. There were multiple times when he'd be half awake and half asleep and start very weird conversations and even make strong movements, like typing on a keyboard that wasn't there. It was sometimes very difficult to tell the difference between him awake and him asleep. Then there was this conversation. Me. "Was the milk in the pantry for a reason?" Him. "No. I thought you put it in there." Me. "You must have done it in your sleep. Why would I put milk in the pantry?" Him. "I thought you did it to punish me, like you did with the socks." Me. "Socks? What now?" Him. "The bathroom sink is filled with water, and my socks that were on the floor are in the sink. I thought you did that to tell me not to leave my socks on the floor." Me. "No. I just thought that was some weird laundry thing you did. For the record, I don't punish my husband in any form, and certainly not by hiding the milk. When he leaves his socks on the floor, I just ask him to pick them up. I don't drown them." My wife was sleeping in the passenger seat on a late-night drive home from visiting her family. Our very young kids are in the back seats, out cold, too. She suddenly snaps up and grabs the wheel, screaming something about how I, the totally awake and driving just fine driver, am about to drive us off a cliff. She was at full strength trying to turn the wheel to the right, which would have been bad. I started yelling, No, quickly realizing that wasn't stopping her. I had to full-on NBA rebound the wheel with my elbows way out and shove her very hard back into her seat. I managed to get a hold of her upper arm and use it to shove her into the door, where she apparently still hadn't realized the reality of the situation and made another grab for the wheel. There was a lot of cursing and screaming. It was not pretty. Once she figured out what she had done, she lost it and started gasp crying worse than I'd ever seen. The rest of the drive home was pretty rough. I actually had this happen, and unfortunately the sleeping person made us get into a terrible accident that ruined my life for 3 years. Barely survived. You're very lucky you were able to stop her. I'm a woman, and it was a drunk guy that was passed out and woke up incoherent and disoriented and grabbed at the wheel, but I wasn't strong enough to overpower him, so we hit a divider on the highway straight on, flipped 4 times, and I broke 16 bones. Had to learn to walk again and read and write. Literal miracle I'm alive. The crazy guy only had a scratch on his head. The doctors said because he was so wasted that the body handles an accident better because it's so relaxed. Crazy shit. Glad you and your wife and kids had the best possible outcome in this situation. A true blessing. The most part about this story is that I was completely sober and found him passed out and felt worried he was getting alcohol poisoning, so I was driving him to the hospital. Made a bad judgment call, putting him in the front seat. Learned a lesson. I also wonder what would have happened if I had just called the paramedics instead, or put him in an Uber. Literally anything except putting him in my car. But I was freaking out and thought I should help him. A split-moment decision I'll never forget. For everyone assuming he was kidnapped, no. Before he passed out, he called me and told me where he was. We were very briefly dating. I knew him a few months, but not well enough to know he has some drinking problems. I wouldn't just put a stranger in my car. I also don't have enough experience to know if he took something else, or was dying, or what was happening. So I put him in the car because I assumed he would be asleep the whole time. I don't have sleepwalkers or people with night terrors in my life or people who get so wasted, so this was a freak accident. I was just not prepared to handle it. No, I didn't sue him. Luckily, insurance covered most of my medical bills. I got no money out of the entire situation. 0. Just lots of grief and lessons learned.